Would you like to start?
Sure. I'm Mary Kane, Senior Legal Counsel.
Roseanne Powell, Board Manager.
Liz Large, Contractor General Counsel.
Julia Rem-Edwards, Board Member and Committee Chair.
Patty Sullivan, Board Member.
Eddie Wong, Board Member.
Kara Bradshaw, Executive Assistant.
You can go ahead and introduce yourselves. We're a small group.
Hi, Megan Mermis, parent of a Laurelhurst student here for the reform.
Hi, Susan Carson, parent of a Daniel High School freshman and also here with the reform.
Suzanne Clark, parent of a Roosevelt High School sophomore and with the Reform PPS.
My name is Jess Cotty. I am a grant cluster parent and I'm also here for the Reform Group.
Jason Stevens, co-chair of the Buckman Foundation,
Sorry, what foundation?
Buckman School Foundation.
And I'm Esther McGuay, Assistant Superintendent at Elementary School.
I am a parent of a second and sixth grader at the KA. And here with the reform groups.
Sorry, talk to communications department.
Welcome everybody to today's meeting, and if anybody's online. We have a mix of policies today, and we originally were going to start with the, well, first of all, do we have any staff updates?
No.
Sure what that is. Okay, switch to that. We were going to first start with the policies that we have under revision. We had a substantive discussion at last committee's meeting about the affirmative action policy, which is being renamed the equitable employment policy. And Director DePass had, as we talked about in the last meeting, had a number of changes she was interested in suggesting, or questions and comments she had. We also made a decision to, instead of trying to just redline the document, because it was actually more redlining than there was remaining content, to redraft the beginning. So since last meeting, the policy was redrafted, and Director DePass had a number of changes. She's going to be about 15 minutes late, so I'm going to wait till she arrives for us to move ahead with that. I want her to sort of publicly share like changes that she suggested and questions she had, so that we have all that happening in a public forum. And the other two items, given that we might move them out of committee today, I want to wait till she gets here as well. So I'm actually going to skip down to religious and cultural holidays policy, because this is something I'm just elevating and sharing that we're going to have a future discussion on. And because Director DePass last year was involved in some discussions around the school calendar, I know it won't be hard to bring her up to date, but I thought that I would at least raise the topic. And we have, and we can, this is just a flag for committee members and board members that we're going to be talking about it. We may create a new policy, or we may also choose to make revisions of a current policy, or we may decide not to do anything. So just as background, last year we had a lengthy discussion about the school calendar, which you may know. Welcome, Director Scott.
Welcome to the birthday. That's the reason I came.
So last year, you might know the board is required to approve the school calendar every year. And over the years, there have been discussions about how we better, we're a diverse school district with families that observe different religious and cultural celebrations. How do we, in a diverse district, recognize that through our school calendar and try and avoid primarily after school and weekend activities, which could conflict with major cultural or religious holidays. So we rebuilt the calendar, and I think if you look at the calendar, the icons at the bottom, we have recognized some holidays, and we do try and there's the things that we can control, like back to school nights and everything else, trying to avoid putting our families and students in a position of choosing between a school activity and a school-related activity and their family celebrations or practices that are important to them. So we've done that with the calendar, and the question that I wanted to ask the committee about is that we don't have necessarily a formal policy that relates to that, is whether we wanted to consider a policy that we have there were two examples in the packet today. One is from OSBA and the other is a Beaverton one. So this being the Beaverton one, is that correct? Yes. Yeah. The Beaverton one, and then the OSBA one is somewhat longer. And there are things, I think it's important that we realized last year, to recognize that there are things that we control and things we don't control. We've had, I believe we sent a letter to MESD about outdoor school.
And OSAA.
And we also sent a letter to OSAA about things that the state schedules. So oftentimes there's state competitions that occur at the same time as some important holidays. We also are, just as background for the two of you, last year we went through the criteria of what should appear, because we should have a defined criteria. Not to put you on the spot, Mary, but do you want to describe the process by which we constitutionally made decisions about what should be, or
I did it last time.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, Mary's got other stuff in this meeting.
Because we had to set criteria about what holidays or things we would put on the calendar.
So when we did the work last year, we have to have religiously neutral criteria to identify the religious holidays, cultural holidays or not, don't implicate religion, that are going to be observed. So we used a sort of religious population threshold in Multnomah County, which was the most accurate data. It's not exactly PPS, but it's close. And I think it was as I recall the work, it was a 1% population threshold. So it's tricky, and there are parts of some of these policies that make me a little nervous, how they're framed in the other examples, because you do want to be, again, as awkward as it sounds, religiously neutral in selecting the religious holidays that get observed, and especially noted.
I can say that when we were looking at it last year, I didn't see Eugene's policy, and because we had long conversations with the general counsel for Eugene at the time, who said that they spent a long time reaching out to a lot of constitutional law experts, as well as getting a lot of community input on it. And it was because it is so difficult to try to achieve the goal without violating the law.
So that's how we came up with the calendar for last year, where we have designated some days and tried to message with the principals of please don't have things that are critical for the school community or for students on these particular days or nights. So the question for the committee is I'm interested in having a policy, even if, and these were just examples, again, so something's on the agenda doesn't mean we're going to vote on it. It's more examples of policies that we could either modify. Usually this is how the OSBA sample policies, they'll send out a sample. Some districts just adopt them, others work them, and others don't do them at all.
Is there something about the current practice that you love different in policy language?
So I think the school calendar is an imperfect mechanism to convey a set of values. It's not necessarily transparent. Like you have to look at all the little icons. Like I wonder I wonder what we're trying to achieve here, what we're doing, and it's, so all the people who were part of that discussion, we have that in great detail. But if you weren't, so having some sort of high-level recognition of what is our practices and our values. I mean, just as an example, last week, first day of Rosh Hashanah, we sent out a major communication to families. I got some feedback that we sent out something right as families that was, there's a variety of opinions about, that we sent it out right as families were starting to celebrate Rosh Hashanah. And it wasn't very, I mean, feedback I got that wasn't very sensitive. And it was like, oh, okay, like thinking about in a district in which we have a diversity of practices to just be aware of it. So I think the reason I would think it would be good to have a policy is it helps explain the calendar, what you're trying to accomplish. So
I thank you, and I will continue these conversations as you, as the committee are crafting policy language. I'm trying to discern whether we are documenting what's done or doing something different. That's all.
So right now, there's no policy about calendar relating to religious holidays?
the existing policy, and I could look it up really quick, but I believe it talks about staff getting time off for religious observance, but it's definitely, it's from probably decades ago.
It's staff, there's a line in the policy that's staff.
Yeah, so it's just focused on staff and Hina, but a lot of, for example, 2 weeks ago, on the East bouncing page, somebody was raising the issue of their kids were scheduled now to go to outdoor school either during Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah. And again, statement.
Something we
Values.
couldn't have, something we could not have done anything about anyway.
Potentially.
Yeah.
I mean, and so the way the calendar is currently constructed, while we call it winter break, it's obviously works around the major dominant religion, but it's called winter holiday. So nobody's going to outdoor school during that holiday. I say there's some things we can do something about, and we did communicate with MESD, which they run outdoor school, and then OSAA around co-curricular activities, so not just sports, but everything else.
Yeah, I wonder if it's not making it worse, but trying to put a whole bunch of different things in.
Well, having a policy gives some general framing guidelines. And like I say, for 20 years, it's a continuous issue. I think it's definitely gotten better. But it's an issue, especially for families who observe holidays or cultural traditions that aren't of the dominant.
Ramadan too.
Yeah.
Can we just look to cities like Minneapolis that have a very high number of people that celebrate Ramadan, and New York City that have a lot of,
Yeah, so I think last year we looked at Virginia, Fairfax County. So I'm going to
what
suggest,
populations in Fairfax County?
unless there's an objection, I'm going to suggest maybe we'll come back with a couple different variations. I say primarily wanted to put on the agenda just like here are things that, again, this last week it got raised by several families within PPS about what do we do to acknowledge it, and it's also an issue for staff. So if you're a staff who celebrates Christmas, you get that off. But if you're a staff member who celebrates a different holiday, what are the rules and everything else? But this is an issue also where, because of the issues at play, we're going to also have to make sure that we stay within the constitutional guidelines.
There is a separation. There needs to be a separation, church and state.
That's why we'll make sure that you guys keep us out of trouble.
I said this last year too. I don't know how popular it is or not. The problem, as you've articulated, is when we prefer dominant religions, right, which has traditionally been Christianity or the Judeo-Christian tradition. So I completely agree with moving away from that. One way to do that is to incorporate everything. The other way to do that is to become more secular and to really say, you know what, our job as a district is not to acknowledge any particular religion. And I agree with you, winter break is traditionally has been around Christmas, but the other way to be fair and equitable about this to say, you know what, the school year is going to be the school year. We're not going to make exceptions for Easter. We're not going to make exceptions for Christmas. We're not going to make exceptions for other things. We're going to do the school year the way we want. Individual students, to be really clear, always have the right, and they currently have the right, and then we could reinforce that in policy, always have the right to opt out of particular things. But as a district, the question is how much do we want to accommodate religion as a secular public school district? And so I think that's worthy of a conversation as well.
We could also, perhaps make a floating holiday or two also to accommodate staff. Because
They have that.
They do have the three
personal days to
okay.
use.
Do we know what the impact of that is? And are people taking those 3 days to observe?
I don't think we inquire.
We don't ask.
Why they're taking them, but they have
Yeah.
wide latitude to take them when they choose to.
Okay.
So, Director Scott, I think those are great questions. I do think that we do, I don't think we're going to get rid of the winter holiday. So there always will be issues raised about, we've already just institutionally recognized the largest holiday in the dominant religion. And of course, then the second holiday. If Ailey and Herman aren't here, they could tell us. Which
I
one.
could go on and on.
But Easter's on a Sunday, so generally not an issue, except for sure when we have kids going to outdoor school on Easter Sunday, we do hear from families. So I think these are good
Winter break
questions.
also aligns with solstice, I would just point that out.
You missed the lead-in we talked about last year, or year before? Last year, we went through the whole criteria about how we constitutionally decide what we're going to recognize, and we did we looked at data, and we drew a constitutionally allowed
That's the
line.
neutral criteria.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we can share that with you from last time. So it's not everything, but it's within a certain band that we're allowed to based on population. Okay,
Based on the world population or
the metro area
the
population.
metro area?
Multnomah
So,
County.
it would be the top religions that are,
So I believe it was
Christianity.
Jewish, Islam, and Buddhism.
I don't know that they hit the 1%. Maybe they did.
We can provide all that
Yeah,
information.
maybe it did.
Um,
Did it? I'm trying to recall.
I say this is less about, every once in a while we have had questions about things happening on Easter, primarily outdoor school, because that's one of the few things that does start on a Sunday. But it's more from families who are not in the dominant religion.
for Easter Sunday, we're hearing from people.
No, I'm saying what we mostly hear about are things that happen throughout the year. For example,
Yes.
scheduling a major athletic competition during Ramadan when students are fasting.
Mhm.
Oh, it was. So yes, it was Christian, Catholic, Jewish, Buddhist, Muslim.
Yeah, so I have to,
Unaffiliated, 48%.
So Catholic and Christian get separated?
That's what I was wondering. Why do we have to be different?
did the same.
I'm not qualified to say that. That's
Uh,
not.
this is data pulled from
So Christians.
Yeah. I don't know that the holidays are all the,
Oh, yeah.
we get
They're
very
different.
complicated very fast.
Okay, but
Makes your lawyers palms
Yeah,
sweat.
it seems to me we could just complicate it. I like keeping it so secular.
Except for
Well,
who,
and you could just let teachers know when there's big holidays and try not to schedule.
Or what is that based on? I mean, this is why you have a policy, to set general guidance, and then the superintendent would implement it by,
Well, I think it is
through his-
important because we are more and more multicultural society, even in Portland. And I think it is important to, I mean, not take every holiday, but I think it's important for us to be aware of other people's traditions. I think it's really important.
I think maybe there's room in terms of, because I like the idea of going secular because our focus should just, our policy should just be like what's best for students. If it's good to have a break here and there, that's what's best for students. The problem I see is also just the convenience of the current breaks and how it aligns to everyone else in the country, right? So like sports teams go take trips because of spring break to play with other schools in other states and stuff like that. And that's an issue of convenience, even though it was based on, the dominant religious holidays. So, I mean, is it possible to do something two ways, where we have something where it's like we state our goal is secular, not promoting any religion, but at the same time, we want to make sure to minimize as much disruption as possible and to, try to plan things around the ones that we do have.
well, that's almost exactly how we approach the calendar.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so,
So I'm happy.
yeah, no, so
Our spring break doesn't line up like, Oregon all has the same week for spring break, but that's different from California, that's different from Utah. So I don't know how we would, I think it's a great discussion.
more to come. And it's a great topic, and our families do care about it, because
I grew up in a family that cared about it as well.
Okay, Director DePass, welcome. The first item on the agenda was the affirmative action. I wanted to wait till you were here so you could either share your questions that you had, concerns, or changes that you made.
Sure, thank you. I had a question about whether we had a civil rights officer in the district.
We are currently hiring for a civil rights director.
A director, okay,
Yeah.
has that position been vacant for a while, or
No, it's new, so
it's a new position?
yes, so we have been, I think, the last 6 months at least, developing a department profile and what it'll look like, and we are currently looking for the director.
Okay, fantastic. The other thing is I wanted to add, I'm looking for the sentence here. Sorry, I think I'm in the wrong document, but I wanted to add a sentence at the end of one of the sentences that says that we're, free of discrimination as evidenced by, and I wanted to know if we could add evidence. I'm looking for the draft right now.
At the end of the first paragraph?
I just found it. It's in the redlined version, the draft dated 8/25 and then 9/5. The comment, and it's really small, and I can put my glasses. It's in the very first paragraph. We say the superintendent's budget shall incorporate funding for the diverse workforce goals provided in this policy. The board expects to see measurable progress every year in the strategies employed and progress made toward reaching the goal established by the Oregon Educators Equity Act. All district employees are responsible for providing equal employment opportunities and complying. I'm sorry, I just read all that and I think what I was asking is after Oregon's Educators Act, if we could add just add onto that sentence that says as evidenced by, and I think in the original version of the policy, there's some language about proportionality. In other words, our goal would be to have a staff that reflects the proportionate
Of our student population.
student population. Yes, it would be that it would be aimed to be proportionate. In other words, yeah, we want our staff to reflect ideally who we have in our schools.
The second sentence in the first paragraph, I think it attempts to get at that, Michelle. Is that sufficient?
If you look at it, says, in pursuit of this goal, PPS must develop a workforce that reflects the diversity of the students it serves. Students must see their diverse racial, cultural, and linguistic characteristics reflected in the school staff or guiding them toward academic and other success.
That gets to the proportionality piece somewhat without using that math word. The other piece though is that how are we gonna demonstrate these amazing values? How are we demonstrating that?
I think that's the annual reporting on the data, workforce data, and which would be I assume can be compared to the student population data.
Is there a reason why we wouldn't add it?
No, I'm not, I'm just answering your question, Michelle. I'm not objecting to your language.
I'm okay with adding that. Do you want to?
Just say something or say it out loud?
Or
It's already in the.
I did put the comment in over the.
so I'll just incorporate your comments.
As evidenced by a
Yes.
workforce that more closely reflects our student population.
Okay,
And I put in to add that after Oregon Educators Equity Act,
we will add that in.
if that's an appropriate place to put it.
Okay.
You had also asked a question about accountability.
How do we hold staff accountable for getting at these goals?
Here's
Maybe I should ask. Do our departments reflect, most of them reflect the cultural diversity of the city? And if not, then that would be something, I would want to know.
So here's what I think the answer to your question is, like, how do we hold, and this I think a more general question about how do we hold the district accountable for implementing the policy, so just use that in general, is that since the superintendent has the operational responsibilities for the district, that there is a staff person functionally who would be responsible for this or anything, or carrying out any other policy. And ultimately, the staff report to the superintendent. So if there is a sense of we're not following the district's not following a particular policy or is not aligned with it, that would be an issue the board could raise with the superintendent. But ultimately, it's like any other thing that would happens on the operational level, which is there's a functional person responsible for it. And ultimately, that person is responsible, feeds up to the superintendent.
That answered my question somewhat. I just was curious if we had departments that we knew could recruit, do more targeted recruiting.
I don't think
that's an HR.
Yeah,
that's an HR question.
Yeah.
And I was curious as I was reading through this. These are great words, and I was like, how are we going to hold ourselves accountable for implementing and hiring to reflect these values?
Director DePass, I know in the past when we've had the superintendent evaluation that you have added language as part of the evaluation process of the superintendent, which would be another way you could do it. Obviously, also data is a very powerful way to have conversations about implement the effective implementation.
I don't have a bench line, anything to measure against right now, so I'm just sort of talking off the top of my head, but that's something that I have been interested in and curious about.
So HR, yes, and HR will be doing its annual employee demographic census, recruiting and retention. The data is available after October 1. They have to pull it, analyze it. That will come to the board. So that gives you current look, year over year, some other.
That's great.
So that answers your question, right? And
it does.
Can be compared year by year. It doesn't say in there though, does it?
That's what
yes, at the last page, it talks about the annual reporting that you can expect.
It does talk about the report.
It's in the last paragraph.
I mean, I guess I hold a mirror up to my own practice, which is read the report and then actually say something about it, or do something about it. So that's on me.
I mean, what happens after? Who's going to do? Is it going to be the superintendent that has to do something about it? The accountability, we have the data, but then done.
Right?
I think he feels very serious and passionate about workforce diversity is already.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree. I think he's trying to push that definitely, but I'm thinking about the point of the policy is also long-term, right?
Right.
So like the next superintendent, if may not share the same values.
Except that there's a law that that requires them to.
Right, yeah, but still.
Well, if there's a law, why do we?
Yeah, then why do we need a policy? So that goes back to the first question.
Well, one of the things is there is a reporting requirement, which is not in the law, which is a tool in which the board can assess year-over-year progress.
But yeah, it's a long term and a long view. And I think that our central office, like the executive team, has got a lot of cultural diversity. I'm just not sure like other departments, you know. I don't want to list them all off and put anybody on the spot, but other departments.
We don't.
I think HR has that information.
Okay, and it's not necessary, just it's something that is on my mind.
Is there anything else?
Not on this particular.
I want to also recognize that Director Hollins is present, and you had a number of questions last time, and I'm wondering, is he typing something to us?
No, I think it's.
Is that me talking?
Yes.
Sorry, that's fine. Director Hollins, do you have something you want to share with this particular policy?
Hello, yes. Can everybody hear me?
We can.
Awesome. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, I did want to say I really appreciate the wording, the rewording of a lot of this stuff. I know I had a lot of concerns earlier on, and I think a lot of it has been weeded out with some of the wording that's here. I guess my only question is, instead of the equitable employment policy, is there a way? Is that the name of the policy? And if it is, can we change that to diversity employment policy?
Director Hollins, the previous name or the current name of the policy is the affirmative action policy. So I think we have the flexibility to rename it. You say the diversity employment policy? So that's what you want to call it?
Diversity in.
Yeah.
Diversity in employment?
However you want to do it.
Okay, great. We can
Basically,
make
yeah,
that
we
change.
use the word equity. Thank you, Director Hollins.
Did you have anything else, Director Hollins, with the new draft?
No, I think it's a lot better than when I read it the last time. I do still have little concerns when we take out, when we try to be specific in what we're looking for. If we're looking for minority educators or minority staff, but outside of that, I think it's fine.
Is it the word minority? Because some people are moving to global majority to describe people of color instead of like constantly like you're in a minority, you're a minority, you're a minority.
I don't think we use minority in this.
Not in this one, no.
We just talked about
Statutory
diversity.
language.
It was the minority teachers.
That was the old name of the act. Yes.
And this is to match the population.
The
So
yeah, and the legislature changed it from the Minority Teachers Act to the Educators Equity Act.
Yeah, I guess it's just, if we're talking about a policy, I guess for me, we've been intentional about all the other stuff we've been doing. And so I this really kind of gives it an umbrella effect versus an intentionality effect. So that's my only comments. Thanks.
Anything else? I'm gonna ask the committee members, do you want to recommend moving this to the full board for first reading, which would be the introduction?
Yes, I'd be in favor.
Anything from staff? Okay, great. I really appreciate Director Pass and Director Hollins, your input from last meeting into new policy. The next item on the policies for revision, last meeting, we had a discussion about the naming school district policy, and we had two potential things to work on. The superintendent raised the issue of resources for any sort of naming, and then also we had a discussion about what filters so that we just don't have a whole host of sort of random one-off suggestions of naming. And based on that, Director Wong and I had some back and forth and ran it by also staff, or staff, that added two criteria. One, that any petition demonstrate diverse school community support. And the second criteria was indicate the name changes being requested in accordance with, and then there's a citation from policy, and that specific citation was around systemic discrimination. So for example, whether it was changing the McDaniel's name, or let's see, Madison or Wilson or the Quakers, that the two things happened. One, it was based on that particular section of the new policy, at the time, the new policy in 2017 of battling systemic discrimination. And the second thing is if that is the reason for the name change, if there are associated costs that the school community doesn't bear, the name change, the cost of the name change. So like Franklin wouldn't have to go pay for, the school community wouldn't have to pay for the new uniforms that switched them from the Quakers to Lightning, or from Madison to McDaniel.
May I interrupt about, so the only note I have for myself on this is in section 7, it talks about systemic discrimination. I think it's systemic racism, because discrimination is a result of, I know it's a hard word, but it's.
Oh, the quick.
So, I mean, systemic discrimination.
So,
the discrimination is an outcome.
Yeah, so it needs.
And I'm in favor of like actually naming the thing that we're trying to address through.
And there were other instances, and I don't know if there's some other cases, but the instance of the Quakers was not an instance of racism, but of having a mascot named after a religion.
The tech. There was the Benson one, gendered.
And gender, the tech man to the Astros.
So maybe there's a better word, but it is broader than
it just
race.
Yes. Let me think about that for a while. I get it. I think there have been two instances where gender and religion were both the reasons for the renaming. But I just had issue with systemic discrimination based on race, religion,
It'd be like a
sexual orientation. I don't know how to phrase it.
How about, okay.
But racism is like, I mean, I feel very strongly about calling it.
How about that discrimination based on a protected class, or however the lawyers might phrase it? Is that?
Yes.
work for you?
Does
That
that
would
get on
cover
our
all the
Quakers a
things?
protected class?
Yeah, it's all religions.
Well, it's a religion.
They're saying it,
Yeah.
it
Or,
works.
or tech men,
Well, I mean,
Well, that's gender.
gender?
So those are all protected classes. Does that work for you?
Sure.
Director Bernard, I just received adding and
Be additive instead of subtractive. That is
brilliant.
that is brilliant.
What are we doing?
Adding racism, so it's an additive, not taking a word out. It's adding a word.
So keep
So,
discrimination, but then have
so systemic discrimination
and racism.
and race, how about discrimination based on, you could say racism and discrimination, systemic discrimination based on protected class?
Yeah.
I'm looking at.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Maybe.
I was literally gonna type in definition of systemic discrimination,
So,
because I
It
don't
would
ever hear
be-
anybody talking about it like that. Discrimination over and over and over again.
Well, that's one of the issues is that,
so
you know,
I'm
race
just
and
getting the
sex
actual,
are based on institutions of power. Discrimination could open it up to anybody. Like, oh, I don't feel like I'm included. I might be discriminated, whether you may or may not be.
well, that's why you say protected class, because those
Yeah,
are
exactly.
defined set of classes.
So I can, that's why I was just pointing that out as like probably reason
But I'm
discrimination
also-
may not be enough.
Say, eliminating racism and other systemic discrimination based on protected classes. So racism leaves, yeah. Just add
Does that work?
Yes, it does. Does that work for Director Hollins?
Director Hollins, do you have a? So the other suggestion, so
Sorry, he's texting me, but he said yes.
you said yes, okay.
So it's
Great.
so racism and other systemic.
It's the, oh, you have Gary Whisperer back there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah.
So we have that, and then the other recommendation, so that's another change the overall policy, but the other recommendation was that we don't cite section 2:1-6. Rather, we just cite section 2. Since that's a clause off a much longer thing. So go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, I'm sorry. I just
That's
had
okay.
two thoughts on the policy. One of them was around the resources. And I just wondered, you know, it says right now the superintendent may indicate a need for staff or resources. I wonder if it'd be better off to say the superintendent will note the staffing or financial resources needed to conduct.
Oh, this is like perfect timing. We had this whole like back and forth over the weekend about like how to phrase it, because this is,
The reason why I was thinking that is two things. One, I think whether or not, I think it's important for us to know what the financial impact is of the decision. Whether we allocate additional resources or not is a separate board conversation. The superintendent may say, hey, in order to do this, I need a staff person. And we may say, great, we'll give you a new staff person. Or we may say, you're gonna have to reallocate a staff person. So for me, what was important from a policy perspective was that the superintendent tell us when we're doing it, these are the staffing and financial resources that are gonna be needed to do it. And then we can have a separate conversation about whether to supplement it. So that was my thought.
yeah, which is, so superintendent.
You'll see in your inbox, but part of it is sort of being clear on what the scale of it is. So if the board designates or identifies X number of schools, we should just have a ballpark understanding of, to do a process thoughtfully. I think as you've seen stakeholders show up from school communities, you know, to have a process well coordinated, and then to make sure that we implement the renaming or the mascot change. You know, there's a cost involved. A lot of it's signage, rebranding, everything from wrestling mats to center court logos to signage, et cetera. You know, just looking at our budget spreadsheets, actual costs for an elementary school, it's probably about $25,000. For a high school campus, it's $250,000. So if you do one a year, you know, we can probably absorb it. But if you're doing 4 a year, then that's a significant thing. You know, we should create an allowance or a budget of resources. So the board should just be aware that, you know, there's an actual cost. Now, coordinating the process also takes time and effort. Typically, to date, these have been principal-led with some central office community engagement support. And part of the reason for the timing is sometimes a principal will say, I can't do that right now. I'd be happy to start that in the fall with some help. Maybe a new principal, they might have other priorities, they may have other things on their plate. If we want to push a timeline, then we would just need to be conscious of the fact that there's going to need to be some dedicated staff help. If we're only doing one, we can designate a staff member a percentage of their time and effort to go help with that. If we're doing a bunch of them, then maybe it makes sense to have a renaming coordinator who does focus on coordinating process and community engagement to be able to do that. So if we get to a point to where it feels like it needs some supplemental resources in people or in costs, then I think it would be my responsibility to come back to the board and say, this is a bit more than we can absorb within our means that we've budgeted for.
So just as background for board members, there are districts around the country that have done like in one fell swoop, like we're going to rename 50 schools, or I don't know how many it was in San Francisco. It was a lot. And the pace in Portland, let's say probably there's less than 5 schools that I've heard, and 2 of them are done. But probably less than 5 schools where there's been an active conversation. And so I think, Andrew, the language that you recommended, that works for me, and I think does it work for you, Superintendent Guerrero?
Essentially to say the superintendent will note the staff and financial resources needed to conduct the process. Yep.
Not me.
Well, so what would be helpful is to scope out for a coming school year. We expect to do elementary and high school. We expect to do 6 schools, or we expect to do 20 schools, whatever the number is. Then I need to adjust and come back to one.
I mean, the one thing is the way it also, one of the options is the board can defer action on the request to a later date, which could be another like sequencing
Exactly.
Piece.
So maybe we're always doing one, but there's a queue.
And then the second comment I had was just the sentence, the petition needs to demonstrate diverse school community support. I just didn't know what we meant by diverse. I didn't know
I'm
if
sorry.
it says the petition needs to demonstrate diverse school community support. And I just wasn't sure if we needed to define what that meant. I wasn't sure if that was a synonym for broad. I wasn't sure if it was getting at something else.
Things that we're talking about, it's also just reason, at least me, wanted to keep it kind of broad is because it allows some flexibility in adjusting in the future in case unintended or unforeseen issues arise. But it still like holds a kind of like bar so that not everyone could just like petition.
And I guess what struck as I listened to the last meeting and sort of some of the concerns raised by Gary and others around, this does allow an individual to bring something forward. And I know that's why we've added the language. And it just made me think, well, who's evaluating? So if I'm an individual and I come forward and I say, I want to change the school name, and I've talked to 5 of my friends and they want to do it too, does that qualify as diverse support? Does it need to be 50? Does it need to be 100? And is the board determining whether it's diverse support, or is it the superintendent? Because if I come forward with 5 and the board says, we're just not going to take that up right now, and then I come back again the next week with 10, do we need to define it in terms of what that is?
Well, IWB Wells had a nice diverse,
Oh, yeah.
I think they
It was a
included
very good process.
some alum, from way back. And students,
I mean, I guess.
but I
what
think
would
to your
say-
point, you want it to be, do we spell it out?
I think it's better to leave it high level versus defined, because it's like, hey, you can get I think you can get a petition with 500 people on it for about anything. So it's like putting a number on it versus, and I think ultimately we're elected district-wide, is that we can make those decisions of what we consider to be diverse or comprehensive. And I mean, sometimes we have names of schools that aren't necessarily that are named after an individual, that maybe that individual school community is fine with. But
For
it
instance,
violates,
Jefferson.
Pardon?
For instance, Jefferson.
there's a group that's fine with that, and a group that's not, as I've found out over the years. But I was also thinking of, for example, Scott. I mean, there are a variety of opinions, and sometimes it's like, either people don't know the person's history, or, you know, we don't care, for a variety of reasons. I think what we tried to do is, and this is the balance that we are trying to strike here, is that you shouldn't have the tyranny of the majority also making decisions. For example, there were a lot of discussions, Franklin, of like, we want to stay Quakers, and it's like named after the oatmeal or the oil. I mean, literally, this is what we heard. And okay, but if you were a Quaker family at Franklin and you had people stepping on your religion or playing basketball on your religion or the variety of things that were like, we are going to lead through a process to move people along, even though it wasn't like, here's 500 or, you know, the majority of the student body or the majority of the alums. I would say the majority of the alums were like, we want to keep it how it is. And
So I'm thinking about this from a very practical perspective, and maybe tell me if I'm understanding the policy right. I got a sense that anyone can bring this forward, but you have to demonstrate diverse school community support in order to move on to number 5, where the board will either direct the superintendent to do it, decline the request, or defer action. And so, not that we would do one of those 3 things on anything that came forward. Am I reading that policy right? So for instance, as an individual, if I say I want to change the school name, does that require the board to pass a resolution saying we're not going
no,
to?
I think if it doesn't make that, or for example, the reason why Franklin moved ahead is because we actually changed the policy to include that clause that we just changed, which is it violates the policy on, at the time, systemic discrimination. And so that's the only standard we've had to date.
Right, so with the word diverse school community support, is that staff saying that the board now, it meets that criteria for the board to take action on it? Or is that the board deciding whether it does? Again, I'm sorry, I'm thinking about it very practically, like how will we define that to know if we move on to section 5 and take it forward?
As written, it looks like the board will do it as
Yeah.
it's drafted. This looks like a board determination, whether that's intended or not, but that's how I read the language.
In terms of what?
The board determining that the petition needs to demonstrate diverse school community support. The requests are presented to the school board. The request has to demonstrate these things, and then the school board will take one of these actions. So it doesn't have to be how you want
So
it.
in practice, it's probably going to be leadership, who then, sort of board leadership, who looks at a particular petition and either says, yes, we think this meets sort of the diverse school community support, so we're going to move it on to whether the board can take action, or you know what, this just really doesn't meet that bar.
I think you're right. And like with everything else, if the majority of the board are like, we don't agree with leadership, then yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right, Andrew.
That's helpful, thank you, sorry.
I'm sorry.
You keep going. Yeah. Oh, you can call me.
So for what it's worth, in the committee, unless people are opposed to it, because it's in a formal setting, could we use first names, or would everybody rather?
I'm fine with the first name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean any
I
disrespect.
always prefer first names, you know.
Yeah.
So we go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, the other thing that we were kind of conscientious about is that we didn't want the bar set so high that it was difficult for people in places with less resources or local time to be able to change the name. So I think that's kind of why I think we left it a little bit open. But yeah, I think that's a real issue. I think who's going to review this.
Yeah.
So
How do we avoid systemic bias?
this is the beauty of policymaking. It's like we've learned some things since 2017, so I think these are actually improvements. So do you have the changes that
Did everyone agree?
Yeah, did everybody agree we can just use section 2 versus the
Section 2.
subsets?
Yes.
Yes.
And then we have Director Scott's refinement of
Andrews.
or Andrew's of the concerns the superintendent raised
Yes.
around resources.
Shall note the
Change in section
financial
7 too.
And then we have the
Impact.
change that we just discussed in section 7 around racism and systemic discrimination based on protected class. Anything else for the good of the order?
And that would be any place that that term is used within the document. So I thought
It's in a second section, yeah,
that's what I thought.
and we can add it there too.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm gonna
I
ask.
have a question. So
Hi,
and this
Director.
is I'm just throwing this out here. So, with this policy and all the things we're trying to avoid or not avoid, could it be possible we just go to numbers? I mean, unless someone is going to discriminate against a number like, PPS school 123, PPS school 124. It just seems like we're talking about something that I think it's okay, but it just doesn't really seem like it's going to get us to our board goals. And if we're having this conversation now, I can imagine what other boards might have conversations about this, in the future. So would it be simpler just to go to a number system versus a naming system? Just a thought.
You mean we'd be naming our schools like New York City, like
PS
PS1?
142.
Like New York, Chicago.
07.
I mean, it's interesting because, Beaverton has a very different policy of naming it like not after people, generally. And we have a mix of, they're mostly people, because even if they seem like they're named after neighborhoods, they're actually, those neighborhoods usually got named after people. I think that's a way bigger topic.
It's a really interesting question though, Gary, because of our spatial, our land use and who lives where in Portland and who is allowed to live where and who couldn't buy land here in 1940s and 50s. And so I think it's really interesting. I say that because there's a lot of community pride around like where you live. And I just think it's fascinating. Yeah, why not use numbers?
That might be.
Why not just name it like Paris, like just go in a shell shape, until we get to 81.
Director Holland, I think that's a very provocative idea. I think if that's something that if leadership wanted to ask the board whether we'd want to take that on, that'd be a huge community discussion, which doesn't mean you wouldn't do it. But I'm gonna let you and the vice chair decide whether that's something you want to ask the board to do, because that is, I could just imagine what the superintendent's going to say that requires in terms of staff.
I serve at the pleasure.
Or we can take the stance that, the community have voted us in to make decisions and use that mantra.
Okay, if you would like the committee to look at that, I can add it to a future agenda.
It was just a thought. So if the committee that's there, wants to go down that road or something that, I just threw it out there as something just to kind of get us away from, having to look at people's names and things that they've done now and how it's interpreted, 5 or 10 years from now or 20 years from now. It just seems like it gets us to really just focus on the educational thing, the purpose of what we're here for. So
I'm going to ask the committee members, and I'm not going to put you on the spot right now, but between now and the next committee meeting, will you tell me if that's a topic that you want to undertake?
Sure.
Again, not to put you on the spot, but and you don't need to answer now because we obviously aren't going to have
She's not going to sleep.
the time, but appreciate you raising that. We always need disruptors of thinking, Gary.
RMA superintendent 14 or whatever number I am has 2 meetings.
Number 75.
I'm gonna ask,
I just had, so actually here it shows 3 choices. One is to defer action.
Right.
As opposed to a later date. Do we need that? Or is
well,
that-
I think so, because it could be,
like a
we
financial-
currently have staff, we're at staff capacity, or,
Oh, okay,
What-
if we want it, but we can't. do it
right.
yet.
Or say, leadership said like, we think this demonstrates broad support or something, and the rest of the committee is like, hey, we need more historical data on this person, or we need to hear from this group before we move into a renaming process. So I'm going to ask the 2 committee members, do you want to move this policy out to the full board for a first reading with the changes that were discussed?
Yes.
Yes.
Cognizant of the time, so I want to just ask one question, I think, which will be relatively brief, so we make sure we have covered it. Has there been any public comment on the policies listed in number 5, student educational records, instructional materials, class size, or nutrition services, meal pricing and purchasing? No. Okay. Just Eddie, for you, generally what we do is anything that's out for a first reading, when we have a committee meeting, if there's any public comment,
Okay.
we talk about it, and whether we want to make any changes to what's in it. So it's always on the agenda until it goes to the other side
Okay.
for approval.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Those are all the stuff listed under the attachments.
Pardon?
Those are all the stuff listed under the attachments, right?
It's the 4th ones, yeah. So we already moved them out of committee and they're out for first reading for 21 days. And so if anybody commented, normally the practice, instead of having the full board discuss a comment, so sometimes we'll have suggestions that we want to incorporate. And if, so in committee, if somebody has a suggestion, we incorporate it. If it's a significant change, we might have another first reading because this is a change. Or we may deem it not significant and or like a friendly amendment, and we go ahead and approve it at the next meeting, assuming 21 days have been done. Okay, so that's done. And we have 5 public comments, right? Okay, so we'll leave enough time. So the next agenda item we have is community engagement, is the equitable private, school initiation and closures, and I'm afraid if we bring that up, we're not gonna actually have time for any conversation on the private fundraising.
Yeah, I think
For staff.
public comment. Let's hear it.
Yeah, so if it's okay with members of the committee, we'll hold that over. We talked about it last time, and there weren't a lot of changes, so we can hold it over to the next meeting before moving it, just so we can.
Same.
So just,
Julia, just on that, I have some concerns with that policy. I'll send them to you.
oh yeah, that'd be great. Well, another reason to, okay. Okay, so equitable private funding for school staff. I hope that everybody had a chance to, well, I'm sorry, Eddie and Andrew and anybody who was attending the meeting virtually. That I made a statement in my committee report about the status and the video cut out. So I had a bunch of people afterwards like, what was it you said? So I tried to create verbatim of what or close to verbatim what I said at the board meeting. and included in the committee comments, and then, so again, sorry, Andrew and Eddie were there virtually, so you missed what I said. And then I'm gonna ask at our board meeting tomorrow night, just, I'll do a repeat, so it's for people who missed it, have an opportunity to just find out. It's mainly a report on how we're gonna set up our committee's work, and also to share when things appear on the agenda. So if we're gonna vote on something, it'll be marked as an action item. So people can, and if it's an action item, people have an opportunity to come and give public comment in addition to the general comment. If we're just discussing it, you'll usually say discussion if it doesn't say anything, but if it doesn't say action, we're definitely not taking action. And as a general practice, I'll be just feeding things into the committee so we have an opportunity to sort of like, here's what's coming on the horizon in general. And so this is an item that has been before the district and the board for probably 15 years or so. And it has been actively worked by the policy committee since 2017. Andrew last year as chair laid out a timeline for, two things happened. Laid out a timeline for the discussion. We had a full board discussion about it twice, I think. And then we also had a work session that I guess or a community meeting, I guess.
It was like a community meeting.
Community meeting on it. And also last year, based on a recommendation or a suggestion from Director Hollins, we put about $8 million into resources that were available to the school community that were about 100 to 120,000. And I don't know if we described it as a pilot, but it was 1 year of funding because it was ESSER or one of the COVID one-time monies, to see if that would be a way in which we could provide some additional equity for those schools that don't either get equity dollars or title dollars or CSI or TSI dollars, or even if they do, oftentimes it's very directive of how they have to spend the money. And then there's schools that have some resources, some that have more than that, and then some that don't have any at all. And so I think last year it was the 1 year in which I heard the least amount from school communities about, we had a very specific school need that we weren't able to fill. So last year, even though we had 3 conversations, there was going to be a policy draft moved, I think it was targeted for February. That didn't happen, and so as with everything else, just carrying it forward into this year. What I would like to do today is, if I think in the past, because Michelle, you've been through several iterations, asked for some community engagement. I'm interested, so we set up the conversation in a data-based, with all of us understanding the data or having the same data in front of us. Specifically the new committee members, the new board members, like what data would you like to have as part of our committee discussions? There's a number of different things, like Dr. Adams has come in before and brought in, here's the data on how district money gets distributed. And over a number of years. And then Jonathan has brought in data on, here's what the two pieces, here's what school foundations have purchased staff-wise, and here's what the schools receiving the equity grants, what they purchased. so those are all data points. I mean, so those are things that I would want to me, that's what I'll be asking for.
We also had a chart, I believe, furnished by the reform folks, I'm sorry to lump everybody, showed actual allocations, comparing the equity funding building by building. And I think that would be helpful.
I think I have most of that after
Okay.
having talked with Jonathan.
So what I would like as a sort of level setting in like a new year, new board is to have, I'd like you to send in what it is you feel like you need. The other thing that I would be interested in, again, last year was one of the first years in which I felt I heard significantly less. So like a school community need, like we needed another 0.2 to do X, or we really wanted to have time, like we had 1.5 school counselors and we wanted 2, so we had the resources. So last year was the first year that I heard less. So one of the things I would want to know is like last year with that money that we gave them, not that we have it necessarily again, but what did school communities buy that they felt like they didn't get in the allocation they got from the district? So that, for example, that's one thing I would want, because that's a new piece of data for me.
So you would want to ask the school.
Well, we have it somewhere, like, because they had to submit, I'm looking
Plans.
back at the 2 individuals in the back.
The school-based funding, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because it all went through a process. For example, they presented a plan and then.
We haven't heard.
So, I'm sorry, is there a question?
So there's a question about what was it or who has the data. So we wouldn't have to get it from schools. All the schools at the end of, and during the budget cycle.
What they spent that $125,000.
Yeah, so in the superintendent's budget, and again, this was an idea of Director Hollings, 8 million of one-time money was distributed out, and there was, I think it depended on elementary, middle, or, I mean, what type of school you were, and then I want to say there were some rough per capita ranges. I'm seeing a nod back
There was a lump
Yeah.
sum, and then on top of it, there was some based on student population.
And based on that, I got a certain amount. And then there was some also qualifier that if you had raised some money to buy staff, that you had to spend part of it on something else. But they all submitted plans that they were supposed to be compliant with.
SAT sometimes.
Yes. And based on that, I don't think anybody was denied, were they? Okay. So for me, I want to see like, what was that again, I heard less from the schools that don't, some of the schools that got equity funds, it's like, but we can't buy anything with $20,000 or $30,000 or whatever the amount is, because it depends, it varies, is they were actually able to buy things that were substantive and meaningful to their school communities.
Some were able to couple that money up with some other monies to get like a vice principal or a climate specialist or any other resource that they always.
Bilingual EAs, was it? Or paraeducators.
So the question I would have for committee members and any other board member wants to participate is like, I'd like to have a consistent, I'd like to have one sort of, this is the information we're interested in, and have it be presented. So we all start with the same information. We can ask questions as sort of like the foundational piece. So the assignment between now and the next meeting would be to send those, and when I have everybody's, I will share it with the broader group, not for reply all, so we don't have a meeting, but so people know what other people requested. And we'll use that as the sort of starting point. Is that?
Okay, so you're asking that we all get that information you're just talking about.
Well, this is a extra credit assignment since you're not on the committee, but you're, but just to make sure.
Oh,
that-
that's right.
Yeah.
But you're still on the board.
Yeah, no, I'm not meaning to be exclusive, I'm just like saying that I, also want to respect the committee process.
Yeah.
Now, if Director Hollins wants to assign you to the committee, I can, but it means you have to come. Go ahead.
So, yeah, I think having the data, the common data makes a lot of sense. The
Yeah.
other thing I would just add, and we don't have to talk about it today because I know we're out of time, but it's just from a process issue, like I think there's I have some real process concerns about how we're gonna move forward with this, and there were concerns I had last year as well, as doing everything we could to bring the community together around the proposal rather than divided. And so I'd be interested in the board having a conversation this year about what's the best way to move forward, which would, something I think is important, that we make some progress and make some changes to the foundation policy, but do it in a way that is collaborative and community-driven rather than divisive. So
My goal
probably too
would,
late today.
my goal would be, to have something that is equitable and that has support.
Excellent. I just also want to say that we have gotten mail from people that feel like they haven't been heard. And when we were at Harvard, one of the things that we were advised, admonished, suggested we do is to intentionally seek out people that we disagree with. And I know I personally have not, I'm all about community engagement, regardless of whether I agree or disagree. I think it's important for us to listen to all of the voices in the room. And I feel like we haven't heard from, we've heard in our inboxes from people that are, describing the process as not fair to them. And, I just feel like we should make an effort to.
I would just note.
And also,
We're
I see that you.
In our second meeting, and I think I don't want to go into.
Okay, I'm just gonna say there are key stakeholders in our district that are missing from this conversation. I'll just put it at that. Some of the people that have process concerns or outcomes concerns, regardless of my own feeling about it, because I would love to see our district, move to a system that benefits kids that look like me. And I still feel like we need to do a better job of, inviting people to the room, to the table to talk about it.
So that's,
Including those schools that don't even, like the schools in my zone that
Don't even know the conversation's going on.
they don't know the conversation's happening. And yeah, we went out to had two meetings and talked to 5 people or whatever, but we need to be very intentional about doing an educational piece and doing take over our mouth and listen. Because we're gonna end up with a better policy for having listened to people that we don't agree with. I strongly believe that.
as someone who's listened to both sides of this for 6 years, I feel like I always listen to, like, same thing with the climate policy. So,
Yes.
like, we can get through to the other side.
That's you. You've been here a long time.
Well,
I
I'm-
haven't.
Can I finish my statement? And we're gonna do our work in public, so.
That's
again,
another thing I would ask, is that we do it in public.
Well, that's why we're here at the committee, that's why I'm asking that we all have the same data, not that we are getting private meetings from different people getting different data, that we have a public meeting. We'll have public comment, and I want to address the comments that have been made about the community engagement, because I thought they were very dismissive, and actually that was run by our community engagement team. Director Hollins and Director Green both recommended individuals. There were people that don't usually show up at our board meetings and representing their community. And I have been really disappointed that some people have purposely dismissed them this was a request from the committee 2 years ago for the community engagement team to run it. So it's like, we shouldn't now be dismissing, it's part of the
Yes.
collective.
And perhaps, I'm even willing, if we need to actually go to people rather than expecting them to come here.
Well,
So
the
I'm
meetings
not
are-
trying to be dismissive,
Yeah, I
I'm
know.
just saying, when I look around in the room, I'm just using my eyes and my senses here to notice that the people that have the most to gain probably aren't necessarily in the conversation. And the people that are maybe the most actively, not disengaged, but that we're hearing from in our inboxes also I'm not hearing from. And you probably have, you've been around a long time.
What was it?
But
The-
I
the
haven't
community
been
engagement
involved.
that's been posted actually was held at McDaniel's and the other was held at Roosevelt.
I
And again,
understand.
it was at the invitation of the community engagement team based on recommendations from principals of like George, Roosevelt, and other school communities. And we can do more of that, but I do want to say that we have, there was that, and it was totally led by the community engagement team, and then they summarized it, and
We got that.
we got that.
Yeah.
And
I'm not being dismissive, I'm trying to be additive, that
yeah,
I'm
I was
looking just
working
like,
about some of the emails we've got who said like, hey, we're hardworking volunteers and those other non-representative people, which was not the
Yes.
case. And like, I don't want to accept that because it's dismissing people whose
Absolutely.
voices we asked to be part of the table. With that, and I
Yeah,
want
so
to do
just-
public comment so that we end
Because they need
sort of time. So I would ask anybody who wants to, who's on the list to provide public comment to come to the table. It's just easier for us to hear. And you'll have 2 minutes, and Carol will call your name, and then you have 2 minutes, and she'll tell you when your time is up. And also, people obviously can you could also submit testimony for the record if people want to, and we'll post it up as well. Kara?
We have Susan Carson.
My name is Susan Carson, Carson. I'm a member of the Reform PPS Funding Group, but today I'm speaking primarily as the parent of a McDaniel High School student who experiences significant disabilities and who has an IEP. I'm concerned that recently advocacy to keep the local school foundation status quo has included the narrative that foundation funds are being used to support students with disabilities. And by taking away these private funds, students will lose services and have to leave the district. I find this narrative disturbing for several reasons. The right of students with disabilities to access a free and appropriate public education is codified in federal law. It's not a special favor granted only when funds are available or when generous private donors underwrite extra staff. During my family's 10-year experience in Portland Public Schools, I've witnessed many families pull their students with disabilities out of PPS because their needs weren't being met and they felt they had no other choice. These decisions are never made lightly and are almost always preceded by years of trauma. So when I hear, if we don't let parents raise funds for their children's schools, they're going to leave the district, and that raises such alarm bells, it really stings. Where is the concern when students with disabilities leave the district? Do they matter less than the star athletes and valedictorians? Applying a Band-Aid in individual schools or classrooms in response to the most privileged or loudest voices does nothing to address the systemic issues facing the district's special education department. It has always been my hope that PPS would truly see all students as our students, regardless of whether they're placed in general education, receive learning center support, or spend time in a focused classroom or intensive skills class. I'm almost done.
Just one more sentence, please.
Moving to a district-wide foundation and advocating together for funding and support at the state level could be a powerful step toward that goal. We in the special education community are used to being fierce advocates.
Can you just
We
wrap
need
up?
allies. I urge you to move forward with the draft proposal submitted by the Reform Group so that we can get started on a plan that will include all voices. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I would ask everybody to try and keep the 2 minutes.
understand.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, 2 minutes isn't a very long time to talk about a very complicated topic, but we appreciate
I'll send in my written
Great, that's a great
testimony.
solution.
Thanks.
We have Ashley Schofield on virtually.
Yes, thank you. It's Ashley Schofield. Yes, good afternoon. I'm a mom to a second grader at Bridal Mile Elementary in Southwest Portland. I come here as a parent and advocate that is begging you to stop delaying reform with our current local school foundation system. Over the last few years, as a parent, I've questioned and raised concerns about how much fundraising is organized in my son's school. I've tried my best to understand why parents and families have to raise so much money to buy staff members that seem very much needed, like a reading interventionist. That is what Bridal Mile has used their foundation money for this year. I've attended school board meetings to understand the policy conversation. I've met one-on-one with our school principal multiple times to understand the value add of foundation money. I've raised the conversation with my peers in my community, and I've listened to what other communities are saying. I seem to ask uncomfortable questions like, how is an auction that makes you pay at least $300 to $400 to participate and gives you special access to teachers and administrators okay within a public school system that boasts it cares about equity? I thought it'd be a simple question, but what I've encountered are families who are scared and conditioned to believe that they won't be able to give their child the best education unless they tirelessly fundraise. The truth is, our communities don't want to fundraise. And it seems like the school district is relying on us to do so they don't actually have to support our schools. In a city that was built on the foundation of racism and white supremacy, using the tools of racist housing policies, it is more than ever important we dismantle traditional systems that do not serve our quest for an inclusive world. We know this policy we have now is broken and that it creates inequitable outcomes on the basis of race. I've heard most of you say this in one way or another in past meetings. So what are we doing about it? Because we are ready to work together. We are ready to get rid of those invisible lines between communities and work on a path we can all agree on, which is that our children deserve the best education. While the community still needs to work together towards state-driven solutions for school funding, the school board has an important and critical role in leading the direction for change at our local level. A district-wide foundation that also prioritizes advocacy in tandem with fundraising is a path that allows you to act now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Peter Sachs.
Good evening, members of the policy committee. Thanks for your time. I'm Peter Sachs, S-A-C-H-S. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a parent of a first grader at Alameda. My introduction to this topic came in April at the workshop or the community meeting that was brought up. And what struck me about that was I thought it was a really well-intentioned exercise to gather some opinions. And one of the opinions I heard from some, certainly not all members of the reform side, but several people vocally stated that their desired outcome didn't seem to be about what's best for students or lifting up all students in our district. Their desired outcome was simply to end foundations. We've, on the foundation side, have asked that this topic be taken to the Innovation Studio to develop a well-rounded analysis and set of solutions. And certainly that could help with some of the data questions and analysis that you brought up, Director Brim-Edwards. But this committee continues to ignore that request, and it's a reasonable one and has a proven track record of working well for PPS. Such a move, even with a 6-month timeline attached, will give the board and the policy committee the time to focus on more pressing matters, such as a looming teacher strike. I don't doubt for a second the willingness of Pat to go on strike, and neither should any of us. This is not a time to play brinksmanship, but we're spending time on the foundation discussion. Enrollment imbalances. We have a number of schools that are profoundly under-enrolled, and others are extremely crowded, and this is independent of the foundation question. Both of those extremes cause detrimental learning outcomes. Failing to tackle that really difficult and important set of issues while wasting time on the foundation discussion instead undermines whatever results the committee hopes to see from the Res J lens. And finally, systematic defunding of educational support roles. And here I'm not talking about special ed, I'm talking about education assistants, our librarians and support staff that play really important functions in our schools. Alameda's foundation is not buying teachers or adding sections or cutting class sizes. This past year, we raised enough for 1.5 FTEs. That was 2 part-time EAs and part of our media specialist salary. The fact that we're systematically cutting these support roles at select schools, that by itself is profoundly inequitable when we should be starting at a baseline where those positions exist and adding to them at schools where the need is demonstrated through the equity lens. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We have Grace Groom. Grace, if you can hear me, I'm trying to promote you into the panelist section. You have to accept the request.
Is Grace the next person up after that?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Was Grace the next one up? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Grace.
Thank you. My name is Grace Groom. I'm a PPS teacher and parent. I'm also a current member of the Community Budget Review Committee. I'm here today to ask this committee to move forward on the Reform PPS Funding Group's draft policy to the full board for a vote. As previously mentioned, this has been talked about in the committee for quite some time, and for the CBRC, it's been a topic of every report since 2018. This year, it seems the board is very interested, maybe more so than past years, with the CBRC report, and we appreciate the support and feedback and effective participation in the budget process. In our recent report, the CBRC stated that it is important to note that individual school foundation funds should be acknowledged as inequities. Because these funds are included in the budget document, making this open for CBRC review, we want to highlight the inequities here. The foundation is highlighted in the budget on page 134. CBRC has made note that some schools have more access to foundation funds than others, and this increased funding is largely available to schools serving populations of higher SES and lower percentages of Black, Brown, and Indigenous students. We encourage the district to develop strategies to decrease the inequities, including but not limited to policy revisions that could provide for a collective foundation district-wide to distribute collected donations in a more equitable way. I also just want to mention this discussion about do we move fast or slow. To quote a former community advocate and former board member, Rita Moore, at a different topic on boundary reviews, we are at no risk of being too slow on this. This has been a long time coming, and we really just need to put some action to it to hear the discussion tonight. I appreciate wanting to bring more voices to the table, and those voices are speaking in terms of their need. We see it in the numbers, we see it in every day in the classroom, and we just need to come together as a community and walk our talk. One pot of money, equitably distributed, and no more deflecting. No more saying we're wasting time talking about this instead of that. This is all part of the equity discussion, and it needs to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Caitlin Kleins? Caitlin's not here, that concludes we have signed up.
He's not online?
No.
Okay. With that, thank you, everybody, and the meeting is adjourned. Appreciate everybody who came to today's meeting.